I'll also go out and say, sorry, Microsoft, but Viva Learning is not for everybody.
TutorLead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
So this one's new management approaches, changes that have happened. I figure I'll go through one or two, and then as I go through them, I'll stop, and then we can kind of talk about them, if that works for you, Asif.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first one, speaking of onboarding, I really have been having this big emphasis point with customers recently, where we've been focusing on that employee experience, both pre-boarding and actually after, like alumni concepts, right? Because a lot of times we can have a great exit interview and a great exit process, but then an employee leaves. Remember, they're like an ambassador of your employee experience, and if you are proud of your employee experience, like you think it's a good one, you should be using those people more, right? As amplification engines, and especially a lot of people they grow beyond your company or their role. That doesn't mean that they won't know other people or influence other people to join as well later. So we've been focusing more on both sides, right? Creating, the solution here would be creating like extranet environments or spaces like that, like where you can bring in these external people and give them, and you can actually track their engagement on it, right? So someone who applied in LinkedIn and et cetera, they're in interview rounds, they come to here, you can actually see like, what is their likelihood when they get competitive offers of joining, right? And we get that data, and it's very high, right? Like, because people get this perception, and I hope it's true throughout the business, but if they're this good on, pre-boarding, digital experience, then it must be an amazing digital experience, for the rest of it. And that could be a big win, especially with remote work nowadays, for people to join that organization. And then the post one's really interesting because, if we think about, a resource that we're not really maximizing, it is our previous employees, especially if they're departing, which we hope on really positive terms. And so if they're making those exits on positive terms, how do we engage with them? How do we, benefit, in creative ways from their continued engagement, involvement, support, things like that. And so I've seen some creative ways that organizations have done that. So yeah, I just wanted to like highlight this particular one. There's a try it yourself button here. If they click on it, it'll allow you to download this from Lookbook, so you can just deploy it in your own environment, which is this sort of templated site for pre-boarding examples that Microsoft provides. And then there's another 40 plus examples if you click on the other item for people. But yeah, any comments on your side, Asif, on this sort of employee journey, or maybe it's the journey itself, right? We think of that, from there's sort of three levels right in the middle of it, right? Performance, learning, development. There's like different areas that we're doing as well in the middle.
Yeah, I think this, you covered it pretty well, so it's hard to add too much. But one of the things that I've seen since the beginning of many of the folks who are here, who will be listening to it later, is Microsoft has always given us 100 different ways of doing certain things, right? And when SharePoint specifically came along, it was no different. Even before that, I experienced pre-SharePoint days, it was the same thing. But in SharePoint, like, hey, here's a canvas, here's stuff to do whatever stuff you want. Like, all right, what does that mean? And in the beginning, many companies just dismissed it. We're talking about 2001, 2002, saying, what is this thing? This is just a document portal where I can push documents and so forth. Then, of course, we started seeing Microsoft get serious more and more in 2003, 2007. We're talking about, oh my God, like 20 some years ago now. But then what we saw, as you're describing also over here, is a lot of industry and vertical specific solutions, which come with processes, content, and other things already baked in, like the templates and stuff that you're pointing out here. And that's where people started seeing the light, because we have to see some kind of experience for us to truly understand and visualize what the capability is. If we're just looking at a blank canvas, and I've tried this many times, I'm sure you have also, Richard, that people just, many times they don't see it, they don't see the potential. So you have to show these things as to here's what it is. Now, they might not use it as it is, but it gets your mind going in the right direction. So the pre-populated sites, as simple as it is, and this goes with anything, super important, way beyond that pre-populated processes, pre-populated branding, kind of like things like that. It gets the brain going in the right direction. All that stuff is very helpful.
Yeah, and exactly, like even if that individual's not inspired by it, like other people might be, and they see correlated ideas, and then there's questions that get prompted from there, and that creates dialogue, and that's what often we want. So let's talk about Insights. So Viva Insights is a new capability from Microsoft. It's part of the employee experience subset. There's lots of different employee Viva Insights experiences, from personal ones to organizational ones. I'll just click through. I won't really talk about all these for now because we'll probably go back and forth on them. But there's like personal ones to stay connected to your peers, booking focus time and managing your collaboration workload, looking at like how connected you are with employees for managing, have I had a meeting, right, with an employee of mine in my own working group? How effectively are managers and employees meeting? Maybe at an organizational level, I could look at those kinds of metrics and insights, especially with remote work. That becomes really valuable. Things like the length of meetings, the number of attendees in meetings, things that we can easily assess, right, based on meetings insights and data sets, or how people work outside their working group. We mentioned networks and employee networks and the importance of that, or things like after hours work and how's that distributed and how's that managed. And even all this can be brought at the employer level, where at the employee level, like the very, very large organizational level, we can start to think about like what's empowerment mean, right? And how is that potentially represented from digital signals, right? If someone's in meetings without their manager, arguably, you could suggest that might show more empowerment than always being in every meeting with a manager, right? And so, there are different signals like that we can look at, in a holistic way. So lots to talk about. The list goes on and on for Viva Insights. When you think of your own experiences thinking about these new changes from Microsoft with tools like Viva Insights, what are you finding, is resonating? How are you starting to think about it with customers? How are you personally, using these things? I'd love to know a little bit more.
Yeah, the workplace analytics and analytics of yourself in general is not something new, right? Microsoft kind of packaged it all together in Insights. I think it started picking up quite a lot more when COVID hit, because that's when I needed to know as a user myself and also as a manager as to what's really going on. Now, the previous method of doing this thing, I hate to say it, but was let's do surveys or let's ask people. But come on, reality is many times you will not get the answers you're really looking for. You will ask a question, you will get an answer. It's going to be very much about maybe a person just checking the box and saying, yeah, 6, 10, whatever, with one my NPS score. But when you're looking at insights, it's about behavior, right? What has already happened? You're looking at the past and some forecasts of the future, some insights, basically, quote unquote, of what is possible. And I think that's super important to understand not what people are telling you, but what are they actually doing? And what can you do as a manager, or maybe yourself as a user, to change things? So, understanding, for example, if I'm in meetings 30 out of 40 hours, like, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. Where's my time going? Let's go ahead and set some time apart. Or if my 10 people, 100 people who are working under me and they're doing the same thing with meetings or things like that, let's go ahead and take some proactive action. Those things were not as clear before COVID, before Insights and all. Now, having said all that, I'll also throw one more thing in here, Richard, and everybody else out there. We have to be careful as to not cross any privacy boundaries when we're doing this stuff, right? Some of the stuff, when I talk about this thing in Europe, for example, there's a lot more hesitation, a lot more pushback as to, why would we deploy this thing? And people will know exactly who's doing what. And even though there are no names specifically associated with that, we know, looking at the behavior, who's doing what, because we have a 20-person team and I can tell if Asif is doing this or Richard is doing this or, Susan is doing that. So there is some hesitation and it's all valid. So we have to be careful to not cross that privacy boundary, because then if you target someone specifically about something that they're doing, that's going to backfire on you, and that's not really going to be helpful. So.
Yeah, I think there's sort of real stuff there, and then there's confusion, right? So what's my favorite example? So I hear, I'm paraphrasing this, but I hear sometimes from people like, okay, but email and meeting load, right? Email meeting load don't represent work and effort load, right? So wouldn't the data maybe be suggesting the wrong insight, and that could cause its own problems? Mm-hmm. And I think kudos to Microsoft. I actually think that they're doing a pretty good job with this, because what they're doing is they're saying the emphasis isn't on things like I said, that meeting load and emails, the data sets they're using a lot. What their emphasis is on things like focus time to help improve behavior or digital patterns that reduce barriers or provide a reduction in extra overhead that often we get when we use digital tools. And so if the emphasis is on detecting those patterns that can free up or enable better work, then that's almost always only supportive, positive, and additive. It's very hard for that kind of an approach to lead to negative, because the goal is not to say, you're not collaborating enough, or you're not working effectively, et cetera. It's to say, hey, this is what we're seeing. Nudge wise, is there something that we could do that might be better, that would free up or remove a barrier? And so the examples, that we can kind of click through here, I think a lot of them, they meet this criteria, right? Because, we're not saying that this is bad, that 30% have less than 15 minutes of one-on-one time. We're saying that this is what we're seeing. And so if you take this metric, this kind of metric at a personal level, and we'll talk about privacy rules in a second, and you make it available as a manager for me to reflect on, that might encourage me to improve how I work. So actually, if you don't know this, in my analytics, to your point, the things we've had for a long time, I can actually see you, Asif, when was the last time we had a one-on-one, and how long has it been, and things like that. You can even do it with external parties, and it's very helpful for me, right, as an individual. Why? Because I have access to that data. If I could better explore my calendar, I would be able to get all those insights. It's just doing it for me at a snap of a button. It's not new data. It's data I always had. It's just some people have an advantage than I might have, because they might be more digitally excellent or dexterous, and so they're able to do more with those digital skills. So it's essentially it's not leveling the playing field, but it's enabling me to compete with them by having those kinds of insights. So the personal insights typically are a non-issue here, and even to a degree, the manager insights, when they're broad enough, when the group size is large enough, tend to be less of an issue here. So there is a couple quick notes maybe I'll just make for reference for those who are curious, that there are design decisions with Viva Insights that are designed for that. I'm just trying to grab the actual data. I had it open here. Sorry, around how many people can be in a collection. Yeah, it looks like it's closed, whatever. But it's nine plus. It has FUD data, fake data that's added to it. That's not going to affect the accuracy of the prediction of 30% or whatever, but definitely makes it hard to figure out who's who, because it creates false signals for that. So there's lots more to discuss, but I actually think, generally speaking, Microsoft's approach here, I think really removes a lot of the concerns around privacy because of that. And of course, you can always do things on the back end, make sure every user account is anonymized, even the groups can be anonymized. You can reduce more and more of that visibility on the data analysis side. But yeah, it's very true. It's powerful, but maybe one of the things that might hold us back is our comfort, familiarity with this kind of approach. And so I hope to see continued excellence on the personal analytics, and I hope to see more experimentation and exploration, I think, for organizations on the leader and organizational insights. But yeah, it's a good challenge example. What about, we talked about employee surveys. I thought that would be another fun one. So, I'm quite familiar with some of the tools in the market that are kind of leading here. Microsoft bought a company called GLINT not that long ago through LinkedIn, and GLINT is a great example of an employee survey tool, right? You have employee engagement. You're checking on all these metrics, and then they essentially provide those in a comprehensive way. So what we've seen with GLINT, let me just show GLINT for a second as I'm showing Viva Insights, right? So you have things like that. What we've seen with GLINT is they've started to think about how do they integrate that with Viva Insights, right? And how do they integrate that with digital signals? So you have these sort of lagging indicators of employee sat. It's pulse surveys, so they can be pretty bite-sized surveys. I want to be clear. There's better models for surveying, but they're still lagging, right? Indicators no matter what. And to your point, they're a little bit questionable in terms of the data accuracy sometimes. And so how do you compare that with digital signals and then improve reporting? And so there's some really clever ways that Microsoft's been exploring this. Some examples with well-being, where they've looked at those survey results about how people feel about their employee experience and things like that, and then they've correlated that against overages and hours, right? If they're working a lot of extra hours after hours, or if there's a lot of manager not micromanagement, but a lot of manager less empowerment, right? Where they're in a lot of calls and things like that. Or, in these examples, looking at things again, how the meeting time for after hours might correlate to potentially, signal data from that. So So, do you have any opinions on like how you feel, whether it's employee surveying, like in general, getting the voice of employees and hearing them, how that might be changing or improving?
Well, Microsoft definitely is trying to conquer the world, because every time I look around, they're acquired a new company with a gap that I thought they had before, like Glint or like Ally. Like, I'm sure we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think there's a perfect answer. I mean, especially the survey business. I've researched that quite a bit also, and the stuff that SurveyMonkey has written, the stuff that Glint has written, and others like that. There is no perfect way of doing it, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm glad where Microsoft is going, where it's a combination of what you're asking people and what you're observing, and looking at the signals and looking at the answers. And yes, answers are super important, because as we know, you need to listen. And how do you listen? Well, survey is a way of listening, asking, and hearing. So a person doesn't feel, hey, they never asked me this thing, why should I care? Well, yes, we do care. Here you go. But then also the other part of the coin is responding. Here's what we have heard. Here's what we see. Here's what the goals of the company is, and here's what we're doing about it. The whole circle.
Yeah.
It can't just be about we've listened. All right, let's go ahead and do the same thing as we were doing before. So it's all connected. It's all coming together with piece by piece, with the OKRs at Ally, with Glint and Insights and everything else. It's going to take time. It's once again one of those blank canvases where people draw things on it, and some people will succeed, others will not. Just to be honest, that's how it's going to be. But hopefully, Microsoft's guidance is going to go the right direction in that.
Very true. Well, now let's talk about something near and dear to our hearts, which is learning and skilling, and the things around adopting of learning and other things like that. So, I think I'm very excited about Microsoft's journey with Viva Learning. It's one thing to say, hey, we want to connect LMS experiences and tools and learning management experiences into Teams and provide like a better way to navigate those and explore them. It's another to kind of do what they've done, where they've also taken it a step further and said, like, how do we make it more social, more shareable, more easy and accessible, right, for learning, even lowercase l learning, right, the learning that might be in a SharePoint object or something like that. So that this is something I know you have a huge passion around with just-in-time learning and other concepts like that. And capital L learning is always going to be there. It's like role learning and things like that. But this is a learning gap area that has been there for a long time, and we're seeing slowly some momentum and movement towards solving it. What are your thoughts generally about Viva Learning today?
Yeah, as you already know, I know a few things about Viva Learning, right? For those out there who don't know, I do a lot with learning in general. I speak at learning specific conferences, and yes, I've done many sessions on Viva Learning, many. In fact, I'm doing one next week in Seattle. But the topic of this next week one, I changed the topic a little bit, saying that, is Viva Learning the right thing for your organization, or something like that? Because I want people to understand that, listen, you cannot just pay for this thing called Viva Learning and your learning goals will be accomplished just like that. That's not how it works, right? Viva Learning is more of a connector. The way I look at it is more of a knowledge hub. It's not really a learning management system. It's not where all the content automatically appears. You got to connect things together to expose the experiences and the content through Viva Learning only if you have certain use cases. I'll also go out and say, sorry, Microsoft, but Viva Learning is not for everybody. Viva Learning is not for everybody, okay? There's a cost to it. It does add up. And sometimes it's just not going to be the answer. Having said that, it is for many use cases where Viva Learning does make sense. Now, there's a free version, there's a premium version, as you know. Free version makes sense for everybody. Premium version, debatable exactly what the use case is.
I think we both have shared opinions on what should be from premium and free, but the SharePoint integration and stuff. But yeah, absolutely.
So another thing that I just want to point out, and I like zooming out a little bit with some of these things and not talking about technology only. You got to think about what your organization needs. And the main thing that I'm a big proponent of is a blended learning model. Right now, when people describe blended learning, they have different definitions. My definition is, what does your organization need? Right? First of all, what is your learning culture? Do you have one to begin with? Are you hybrid? Are you completely in person? Are you completely remote? What are the persona of your user? Are these manufacturing people on the line? Are these completely knowledge workers or scientists? What is it? Keeping those things in mind, you're going to blend a mechanism which will work for your persona and not for somebody else's. Don't just copy somebody else. That's not going to work for you. What works for you? And that might be a combination of in-person learning, virtual, synchronous, maybe a learning management system, maybe LXP, maybe LRS. There's so many different L's these days. And maybe, John Burkholder just said it.
Yeah, contextualized learning.
That's what I specialize in, contextual learning or contextual micro learning, which is part of the story, right? Yeah, like that. The in-guided, context walkthroughs and other contextual experiences. But this is a part of it. It's not the whole thing. It's part of it. You need this in addition to other learning technologies to make it completely a great experience for your users. But that cannot be done in a vacuum. That's the big thing. You can't just say, okay, well, Asif said that, or Richard said that, or whatever, here's the answer. That doesn't work that way. You have to decide for yourself what's going to work. Otherwise, a year later, you're going to be complaining, oh, these guys just lied to me. They said this was the answer, and look at this. It's not working for me.
Yeah, I think it's a good acknowledgement that, today to be successful as a leader or a manager, you have to be active in that learning process for those who are your constituents, the people that you want to be successful. And, historically, there's this a lot of times where we would defer to the capital L learning process, right? That process learning through the LMS or something like that. And, good managers would always still look at, career development, and they recommend training and things like that. But with the accessibility of training, right, the velocity, right, there's a huge change in the skill sets, digital and otherwise, that we need to learn now. It's much more rapid and more contextual and more dynamic than it has been in the past. And so that leads to a need for some groups within the organizations to take it. Of course, individuals should take ownership for their learning, and there's certainly some responsibility there. But mentors, managers, other people, peers that are helping one another, the more that they can provide that learning enrichment, and I think the better, and the more engaged they are with tools and techniques that empower them, I think typically that leads to a better result as well. So totally agree. These examples that are kind of skimming through here of this contextualized, in the work, in my active work, I don't go somewhere else to learn, right? I'm in my place of work and I'm learning in that environment, I think is much better directionally for a lot of times for customers. And it's a good signal of maturity. Organizations that have made these investments typically are a little bit further ahead.
Let me add something else on that, if you don't mind. I'll say something that's also controversial a little bit, that training is not always the answer. Even learning is not always the answer. And what I mean by that is, when someone is asking for you to make a hole in a wall, they're really asking for the hole, not asking for which drill to be used to make that hole. And you got to focus on the hole and not just a tool that is going to be used to make that hole. I'm sure you've heard of that analogy before. And the same thing goes, I think, for different training and learning mechanisms. When my kid comes to me and asks me for help, or even an end user comes to an admin to ask for help, they're asking for quote unquote help and support. They're not saying, can you train me on this thing? That word doesn't get used as much. It's about, can you help me with this? Now, training might be a part of it. Don't get me wrong. I want to get better at this, but that's a tool. That's not the result. There's
this analogy I've heard lots of times where people say training is optimization, right? And education, or whatever you want to call it, is awareness and interest building and all these other things. And you can't just do enrichment of understanding without interest and awareness, right? Because then you're missing out on all sorts of related opportunities. So I love that. Too much optimization focus with training, overused. Everyone overuses training. Let's be honest, in this industry, right? So makes total sense. And that leads to people saying, well, no investments in learning, right? Or whatever, because, training isn't resulting in the outcomes that we want. Let's talk about other ideas to kind of explore and enhance this. We showed one with VisualSP. That was what you saw before with the in-context learning. Another one that I'm a big fan of is this kind of, it doesn't need to be this solution, but this kind of concept of study groups, these this way that you can, it can be through Yammer, but this way that you can help people learn together. So you can kind of create these opportunities across network boundaries, across working group boundaries of like, hey, I want to learn more about X, or I want to learn more about product, or I want to learn, more about how to run better meetings, right? And so instead of focusing on, a lot of these where we create things like how to use Microsoft Teams better, let's create these communities where it's like, how do we run better meetings? How do we make meetings better? And you'll get typically more responding, you'll get more interesting variety of contributions, and you'll typically elevate understanding. And then that can be funneled, like it can be a content source for your standardized learning programs and development, things like that. So I really like these kinds of solutions. I thought I would use this one as an example for reference for those who are attending. Let's move on to Ally.io. We mentioned it a little bit earlier, which is a kind of a new challenge, that we're all trying to figure out, like how to. OKRs have always been around, but like this idea of being able to contribute to your OKR, being able to have some more autonomy as it relates to your OKRs, that's something that has been hugely on the rise in organizations, and more expectations around it as well. Obviously, Ally.io is kind of a market leader in this category. I would argue probably was the market leader before Microsoft acquired them. I hope they remain, with Microsoft's support, the market leader. But it's been pretty crazy when we talk to customers about Ally.io. So we're lucky enough to have a couple customers who've been using Ally.io for years. And when we were talking to them, it's kind of interesting that they really love it. Like, it's this weird thing. You get a customer who starts to use this tool, and then you can never remove it, because it's like an addiction. Like people kind of get used to it, and this visibility chain that you get from being able to go, all the way down from like an ADO check-in or whatever, like checking in my widget, to all the way up to the organizational fiscal objectives is really nice to be able to see that kind of goal attainment and alignment and things like that. So so certainly this is having an impact in organizations today, and it will be a new Viva workload that will be named hopefully soon publicly, so we can start talking about it that way. So if we look at things like this, or if it's not Ally.io, other new categories, right, of experience like this, do you have any things that you've seen, or any commentary on your side for how you've seen these kinds of things fail or work in the past, as an example?
We use it in our company, actually. The OKRs. I know we're short on time, so I won't go into too much right now, but here's something that I'll say that some people think we can use OKRs, which is objective key results, and just replace KPIs. That's not what it's about. It's not a replacement. And the way I think about it, if my analogy is correct, let me say that you're in a car and you're looking at your dashboard, and you're saying what the RPM, the fuel, and everything else is. These are your KPIs, your indicators. While your destination doesn't change, did you get there? Did you get to your destination?
Progress towards it. Yeah.
That's your OKR, your objective, your key result. Yes or no? It's a very simple answer. Yes or no? Did it happen or did it not happen? That's not KPIs. You still need KPIs. Yeah. I don't know how deep you want me to go in there, because I'm looking at the time. I know that we're short on time.
No, I think that's it's if there's one takeaway, I think, and you're probably accurate on that. Like the one big thing people who are trying to understand this, right, as they play with it or as they experiment with it themselves, is that the first thing we often see people do is they put KPIs in there, right? Like attain this revenue, whatever, instead of like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what is the actual outcome of that? We want to enable this, or we want to
Exactly.
do that. These yes or no kind of answers instead. I agree. I think that's probably the misuse of this and the challenge that people have making sense of it. So that's a really apt piece of advice. And you are right. We are running a little bit low on time, but let me move on from this then, and just kind of wrap up. We've been talking about new approaches, new methodologies that are kind of changing things, new technology innovations as well. And I think almost all of them, they're proactive. As we mentioned, it needs to be not reactive, like less lagging, more proactive, predictive, and they're mostly intelligent. Like almost everything we've talked about, like there's new data we never had before, right? Or we maybe had, but it was really inaccessible, right? Really difficult to get. And then of course, almost all the innovation we're seeing, at least in the employee management experiences, tend to be around digital excellence, improving, digital outcomes, because so much, employee management, performance, those types of things are oriented around digital skills and digital dexterity and things like that today.